Right, we're recording. We are here with Oswaldo Horowitz. How are you doing today, Mr. Horowitz?
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to be meeting with you.
Excellent.
Mr. Deep Left Jockle.
Yes. Pleasure to be meeting with you. I have heard that you've been traveling around and you've been investigating the secrets of the deep and the dark heart of Africa. Two very different areas of the globe, but maybe with some intersections between them. So I guess let's start from the beginning. How did you start your global travels and adventures? Where does our story begin?
So, our story begins with a mutual friend who drinks a lot of ketchup. This is where the story begins. And let's see, essentially, I found out about this Italian fugitive that was living on a floating platform in international waters between Dubai and Iran. And I was like, that's fucking sick. I've got to go and join that guy. But the only problem is if you're a fugitive and if you're living in international waters, you don't want visitors because that's pretty dangerous. So this was my dream for a long time, was to reach this guy. And I had no idea how to do it. And essentially, I got in contact with one of his business partners. And I told this business partner that, look, man, I'm this filmmaker and I want to go and join your friend Samuel Elandi out on his ocean hideout. So, being a new filmmaker, he said, send me any of your previous work. So I thought, all right, so this guy, he's wanted by Interpol. He's living on a floating platform. And what could I send him to convince him that, I wasn't a shit thrower. I wasn't trying to dirty his name. And I wasn't any kind of establishment journalist. It's quite a delicate matter. And this is a whole other story, but tying things all together with my initial statement about how it all began with a friend who was addicted to ketchup, to show to this friend how disgusting his ketchup habit was, is we decided that it would be a good idea to cover a Mexican woman with ketchup while she was lying on the American flag. So we covered this girl with ketchup, and there's a German word which your listeners, I think they should know. It's fantastic, or phrase, I should say. The phrase is Gesamtkunstwerk. Do you know the meaning of Gesamtkunstwerk?
Together artwork. It's a holistic art.
Yeah, it's there's no direct translation, but I like to think of it as an all-encompassing art form, a total work of art, a Gesamtkunstwerk. So anyway, when we had covered this girl in ketchup, completely covered, and she could only breathe through a single nostril at the end. She was so covered. And there was this ethereal moment where I was covering her with this bottle of mustard, like a hot dog. And I get to the final unexposed nostril, and I just flick it into her nostril. And I realized that in that moment, I had to be a filmmaker. This is my calling. This is my destiny. It was in that moment. And then she was amazing. She stayed still for about 10, 15 seconds, even though her face was on fire. So anyway, how this all relates back into this travels is that then when this international fugitive, when I got in contact with his business partner and he said, send me any of your previous work, I sent him the ketchup. Essentially, I like to call it a patrio-pornographic political short, but if you were speaking in very crude language, you would say that this was a ketchup bukkake. So I sent it to this guy, and he then ghosted me for about 3 weeks. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm a fucking fool. Why would I send something so stupid? I could have pulled some shit together. But anyway, as I would later find out, this guy is involved with I'm going to have to phrase this delicately. He's involved in the crypto world, which means that his Telegram gets filled up with messages. And he later told me that he didn't mean to ignore me. It was just that he had so many messages from crypto scammers. But he sends me a message back 3 weeks later, and he says, "Nice." He says, "We are happy for sure to have you." So it was a big win. So essentially, it was a whole fucking journey. Like the story does not. But there's a whole big chunk that I will be skipping through. But in a nutshell, that was how I managed to reach the ocean hideout of Samuele Landi. And I think this illustrates a very important life lesson in that it is never wise to appear wise. Really, you should try and appear foolish most of the time, because people won't suspect you that way. You know, when you send a ketchup bukkake to a guy wanted by Interpol, he thinks, this guy's not a government agent. He thinks this guy's just some fucking, well, I would say idiot, because it's, as I told you, it's a Gesamtkunstwerk. It was shot very well. But he thinks this guy is not a threat. So anyways, so then I'm on this fucking ocean hideout. Actually, so before I continue, I would like to just interject with a small anecdote. And this was, so I was at a few parties with these English people, and I'm recounting this story. And it's happened a few times now where I'm saying the story and their faces are blank. It's like the words I'm saying aren't registering in their head. And I'm like, what? Like, this is so absurd. Like, how could I possibly amuse this person if they're not amused by this? And I realized the problem is that they think, I think they think that I was just bullshitting them. I think they thought this whole thing just sounds like this totally far. It's almost too foolish to make up. But anyway, after sending the ketchup bukkake, I arrived at this guy, Samuele Landi's ocean hideout, and I was chilling with him. It was a fantastic time. And whilst I was there, I found out a couple of interesting details about him. So this is not just any international fugitive. This is Liberia's consul general to the UAE, and he was actually running the Liberian embassy from international waters. And you would often joke, he'd say that if any Liberians in Dubai were needing embassy services, they would have to swim about 35 miles to go and see him. So anyway, so whilst I was on board, he was telling me, he says, you've got to go to my I say not my home country, but you got to go to my adopted country, Liberia. Because the thing is after he fled Italy, because he was facing all sorts of criminal charges, he thought, I need a new passport. So he rocked up in Liberia, and they gave him a Liberian passport, and he became very useful to the Liberian people. He has some of the most curious friends imaginable, because he was telling me, you've got to make a documentary on Liberia. And he said, you've got to meet my friends, you've got to meet this fellow called General Butt Naked, and all these strange characters. So, long story short, I filmed on the guy's floating platform for a while, and I plan to return February of this year, because I had a lot more to film about. I mean, the idea of the documentary initially was about seasteading. It was about this guy trying to build this floating island, but I suppose the story took its turns because just before I was about to return, I had all these fundraising problems. I was trying to get a better camera, and people weren't giving me money on this GoFundMe. And I was postponing my return to this guy, and all sorts of small events happened that pushed back my return. And during this time, I then don't get replied to by Samuele for about 7 days, which is kind of strange. And he's usually very prompt. So I rung up his daughter, and she said that there'd been this giant storm. And there'd been this body, this mutilated body, which I later found out was recovered naked with all of the skin removed. This body was washed up in Dubai. And I was thinking, it was fucking surreal, because I was like, that could have been me. It was only because of, essentially, I mean, one reason is that Bitcoiners are stingy. This unironically saved my life, the stinginess of Bitcoiners, because I set up this fundraising page with Geyser, and the Bitcoiners didn't want to give me money, but I have to thank them because as a consequence, I wasn't on the floating platform when Samuele died. So after he died, I was like, well, I got to go and got to find out more about this guy. Like, why is he wanted by Interpol? Is the corpse really his? Because when his family was called to identify the corpse, they weren't able to. It was unrecognizable. And then they did a DNA test with the guy's son to check if it was really him. And then I was told that by the lawyer that the results would never be made public. And then I was later told that the body has been cremated. So I was like, this is all a bit suspicious. So I figured I gotta follow this guy's trail around the world. I gotta find out who his friends were. So that then is how the deep seas are connected with Africa, with the West African nation of Liberia, to be precise. So that is a little bit of what I've been up to as of late.
So
I've spent some time.
You got to.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to lead to where you were going. So you got to Liberia, and
Yes.
so you mentioned General Butt Naked. Was this a close friend of the seasteading hero of the story, or is this a friend of a friend of a friend?
Well, they knew each other. I mean, Samuele, he was, as I would later find out, he was described as the brains of the previous government. So George Weah, who is this football legend, he won the Ballon d'Or. He was the FIFA World Player of the Year. He's like Messi, Ronaldo levels of fame for people that are into football or soccer. And so Samuele was essentially running that guy's government. And so as the main advisor to the president, you know a lot of people. So, they were acquaintances. They knew of each other because General Butt Naked, despite eating over killing 20,000 people, that was the lower estimate that he said. He said on national television, I'm not going to do the accent, no less than 20,000 people. So, and even more absurdly, he's been described as the second most popular man in Liberia after George Weah. But the point I was making with George Weah was that there are serious doubts as to whether George Weah can effectively read and write. And you think, is this some kind of, is this true? Is this just this rumor? But his election slogan, all right, was, "We don't care if he's educated or not, we will vote for him." So he turned his biggest weakness, not being able to read and write very well, into the platform with which he won the election. So Liberian presidents have some of the most fantastic election slogans you can ever come across. My favorite one, though, of course, is, this really is Samuel's friend, one of his best friends, is this fellow called Charles Taylor, who some of the audience might be familiar with. And Charles Taylor, so he is currently imprisoned for crimes against humanity in the United Kingdom. And his election slogan was, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will still vote for him. Vote Charles Taylor." So if you ever think the US election is absurd, think back to the Liberian election after the Liberian Civil War. His election slogan was, "I killed all of your family and you should vote for me." So things can always get crazier.
Did Charles Taylor win the election with that slogan?
With a landslide. It was actually the highest percentage of any Liberian election ever.
All right. Well, so you got there, and as you're meeting these various people, I think from what I understand, General Butt Naked is the central character. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to be in the presence of somebody who's claimed to kill 20,000 people. Is he still the man that he was? Has he changed?
Wow, bro, it was so fucking surreal meeting this guy, looking into his eyes, thinking the shit this guy has seen. He has ripped the hearts out of children, and he has done this every month religiously since the age of 11, since he was initiated, every single month until General Butt Naked spiritually died, so to speak. He was sacrificing children. So, man, just being in the presence of this, it was surreal. But the thing was, is General Butt Naked, for this current project at least, he is merely a side character, because General Butt Naked, he told me some interesting things. So he is known to sacrifice children, but the question is this just a one-off? Is he the only guy in Liberia that does this? And it turns out he's not the only guy in Liberia that does this. General Butt Naked, he said that he estimated that a very small minority of Liberian politicians don't sacrifice children. He estimated 90% or more sacrifice kids to help with their election chances right now, currently. So I suppose this way in which this perhaps fits into the documentary is it's giving a background to the kind of government that Samuel Alandi was running. This was the world that he was stepping into. So, but I would say he is a background character in this documentary, but a project which has been on the sidelines or in pre-production is I would like to make a film about the life of General Butt Naked. I now consider myself one of the world's foremost experts on the life of General Butt Naked. So this is something that when this film, The Legend of Landy, is finished, that'll be the next mission.
So, what is next? Are you focused right now on talking to more people? Are you focused more on basically doing, so I don't know if you'd call it archaeology or deep sea submarining, what is the next step in this adventure?
Gosh, vocalizing this shit, it all sounds so absurd. So I suppose my filmmaking motto, or my life motto so far, or perhaps the thing that guides me is greed for the weird. There's all this weird shit out there. I want it. So to answer your question, yes. So we're trying to find the shipwreck of this guy's floating platform. And I can't say too much about this, but let's just say, let's skip it. Let's move on. Essentially, we're trying to find this guy's this guy's floating platform. So it's between. We know its final coordinates, and we know based on the testimony of one of the survivors that I've met, we have figured out the ship that picked up one of the survivors. And you can, and so for every single ship on the ocean, there's a thing called an AIS number, which essentially broadcasts where the ship is all the time. And this is a legal requirement for ships over a certain size. So the thing is that we can't just find the AIS number of Samuel's vessel and see the last known coordinates of it, because it turns out that he was essentially operating a pirate's vessel. So this is a 72-meter by 18-meter shipping container barge, so not an insignificant size. And for some reason, he was actually moored in a busy shipping lane into Dubai. So we know his rough area, but we don't know exactly when this thing split in half, where it traveled to. So we have a man currently in Dubai, and he has got all the latest sonar gadgetry. And he is helping us locate this thing. And then when it is, we will go in and film this thing underwater. But there's a few things that we're hoping to find, but I can't really say what those things are at this point in time. So there's that, and there's some things to be done in Italy and some other things to be done in Dubai. As you can imagine, when you have friends like Charles Taylor and General Butt Naked, you have some very strange friends. So we've been meeting some of these rather strange friends around the world. So that's kind of the current mission.
Did you feel more, I don't want to say frightened, because that would be to assume that you ever felt frightened, but did you feel more apprehensive, or did you have a sense that you were in greater risk by being on an illegal international criminal shipping vessel as a journalist, versus being somewhere in Liberia, being, having conversations with known murderers and things like that? Did you feel more comfortable in one versus the other, or is it all just kind of, you're not even thinking, you're not even doing the threat assessment, you're just, going to the next place on the map?
I would say this is important to point out that I do not associate with active cannibals. So if this guy was actively eating people, I would not be hanging out with him. I can tell you that right now. But I have a few things to say about this. First of all, I actually... well, okay, so first of all, I do... I don't have some kind of death wish. Like, I'm not a fearless individual. I feel fear. But for me, it's like, does this fugitive living in international waters and he's trying to build a floating city, I've just got to fucking go there. Like, for me, it would be a denial of life itself to have this as a sincerely held dream, to want to make a documentary about seasteading, and no one is trying to build a city in international waters. And then I find out about it, and I'm like, oh, I can't go there because it sounds scary. You know, like, of course, like, this is just a fact of life. But I will say, here's a piece of wisdom that I learned from General Butt Naked. So I was asking General Butt Naked, how do people unintentionally expose themselves to malevolent forces? How do people expose themselves to demons unwittingly? And he said one of the main ways in which people expose themselves to demons is through fear. Because he says, if you knew that Christ was Lord, if you knew for sure, with certainty, of the true nature of the universe, and you fully believe that, how could you ever be afraid of anything? If you knew that when you were going to die, you were going to go to heaven, and you were going to be there with all the angels and with Jesus. Fear, what that really indicates to you is that you actually don't fully believe. It means that your connection to the divine is not tight, you know, it's severed in some sense. And when your connection to God severs in such a way, that is when you then expose yourself to demons and to other malevolent forces. And to General Butt Naked, I would say that it's very interesting to meet him, because this is not someone that believes in God. What I mean by this is he is certain that God exists. To him, it's not something you believe in. It is a permanent facet of his reality. He was saying that since he was a child, he was able to speak with his tribal deity, who's called a Nayabaoe. And he would speak to him in dreams. And every night in his dreams, Nayabaoe would reveal to him children that he should sacrifice. And he would give them the names and faces in the dream world. And then General Butt Naked would then have to go and find these children and sacrifice them. And you think, well, how could he possibly know? How could Nayabaoe, if we're having a sort of skeptical, sort of atheistic stance on this, how did Nayabaoe know? And Nayabaoe, he instructed General Butt Naked to go around Monrovia and play checkers with all of the local children. And he became very well known across the city for being a checkers champion. And so a side note is that actually African checkers is actually a lot more complicated than European checkers. There is a lot of additional rules, and it's actually a much funner game. So if anyone is interested in board games, check out African Drafts, the rules. But anyway, he would play drafts with all the children. And he would say, of course, he had an ulterior motive, because whilst the children were, focusing on the game, he would be staring into the faces of the children. And he said that everyone has a spiritual countenance. So he said, this is not something physical, but it is something that is revealed to you through looking at them. It's something that in the dream world is the spiritual marker of people. Maybe this is kind of, I'm not sure, the gut reaction you feel to someone's physiognomy or something like that. I'm not sure exactly. But anyway, so when he could then find a spiritual marker for the person, then in his dreams, the deity would reveal to him that the children should be sacrificed. So one question, of course, at this point is, how does Nayabaoe select victims for General Butt Naked to sacrifice? Because, he only had to do, from the age of 11, he was only doing one sacrifice a month. So he told me, when I asked him this question, that Nayabaoe, he only wants the best. And what is the best? The best is the oldest possible female virgin. So, part of the reason is, actually, I'll go back a step. I'll explain something else, and it will tie back into this. So one thing I was asking him, why is it that modern people can't seem to perceive as many miracles as people did in the past, for example? We have all these religious texts, but why do modern people seem to be so spiritually closed off to this reality? And he was saying that this is actually not the case. He was saying that modern people are not spiritually closed off when they are born. He says that children naturally have these abilities. So when I was a child, I would say I have no conscious memory of this. This is something my mother would tell me, but she was telling me up to the ages of about 2 or 3, I could see fairies. Like when I'd be walking through the forest, I would see these spirits that would hide inside of trees and that would be inside certain plants that would come out to me, and I could fully see them. And General Bodnaik was saying that most people have these abilities in different amounts, but he said that this connection to the kind of the unseen world, it's it's almost okay. So when you're born, you're this kind of spiritual being that is placed into the material world, and you haven't yet been tarnished by the material world. But certain ways in which you can be tarnished by the material world is, for example, if you have trauma. So, for example, your dad rapes you, and then you think, everyone in the world is this kind of dark, malevolent force, and then the kind of spiritual character of reality takes on this very negative energy, and you're not able to perceive, divinity in its true sense. And this is why, for example, certain religions, they believe that you shouldn't cut your hair because you are materially tampering with yourself. What General Butnagel was saying, getting tattoos and things like that, like anything that, kind of tarnishes your spirit in that way. So one thing that General Butt Naked was recommending is he says that ultimately when you raise children, this is kind of amusing, a guy who eats children recommending how to raise children, but he has some great wisdom. He says that you should really raise your children in the most innocent environment possible until they go through puberty, because in this way their spiritual powers aren't disrupted in the same way. So, for example, a more concrete example of these spiritual powers is that children from birth can bar hang for minutes at a time. You can take a child out of the womb and it can bar hang. And they never lose these abilities if you continue practicing with them. It's like they have this innate strength. But the thing is, most children, they forget how to do this. And then later in life, they find it difficult to relearn it. And so that's one example. I mean, another example is that children between the ages of 0 and 1 are able to distinguish between all different tones, between all the sounds of all the languages. But there is this pruning effect that happens after that age, because it's not important to be able to distinguish the tones that you might hear in Chinese if you are an English speaker. So an interesting study on this matter is, and this is okay, so there's 3 groups. The first group is the control group. It is children that are raised in an English-speaking environment, and the only language they're exposed to is English. The second group is, again, English-speaking children, but they are exposed to Chinese through a television screen. And they have this person that, sings them lullabies and talks to them through the television screen, and it's kind of like on Skype. And the third group is English-speaking children that had a Chinese nanny, and they controlled it such that the exposure to Chinese in the group through the television and the group with the Chinese nanny was exactly the same. And so this happened from the ages of 0 to 1, and after the age of 1, all exposure to Chinese stopped. And they would then test these children year upon year to see if they could distinguish between the tones of Chinese. And they found, very, very interestingly, that the control group and the group that was exposed to Chinese through the television had the exact same level of Chinese ability, i.e. nothing at all. But the group that was exposed to Chinese just between the ages of 0 and 1, for a long time, they could retain this ability to distinguish between the tones. So, I mean, these are kind of 2 examples of abilities that children have from birth. I would like to know if any of your listeners know other abilities that they think children innately have that they need to relearn. So one of these, other abilities, as I was going back to what we were talking about earlier, was this spiritual connection with the unseen world that for many children is severed through trauma, or they are abused, which means that the spiritual other world takes on a very negative character. But I would like to know, to the listeners, do they know of anything else? Or indeed, Ken, have you got any examples of these innate abilities that children have that they are good at from being born? I would like to know. It's a topic I'm very interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would put it in terms of like neuroplasticity. You mentioned linguistic abilities and physical abilities. And I don't necessarily think of those things as um, abilities in themselves, but sort of meta abilities. Like, a child isn't born knowing how to do martial arts or a gymnastics routine or some specific, physical sport, but they are, children are born with a higher capacity um, for those sort of things. So, I think of my own posture, for example. Every child has good posture. We develop bad posture over time because we are digitized, or even prior to digitization, scribes, ancient Egyptian scribes, they were hunched over and they were lurching forward. So there's something inherently about written culture and the written word that causes people to contort their bodies into positions which are not ergonomical, which are not athletic, which are not healthy, that don't promote digestion and blood flow and all of these subtle, in the same way if you had a car, like there's a certain aerodynamics to the car. And if you built, the car in a different shape or something, it wouldn't function as well across the board. And so, because you'd have more drag on the system, it'd be more wear and tear, the parts would wear out sooner and so on. And, we're a little bit more flexible than a car. So we can, some of these language skills you're talking about, people can learn Chinese later in life, or they can learn to bar hang later in life. You can, do yoga and fix your posture. But I don't see it so much as like children have this positive ability, but, maybe it's a Taoist concept. You read the Tao Te Ching and it says that which is living is supple. It is flexible. It is a vessel that can be filled. That which is dead is already full. It's stale. It's dry. It's brittle. It breaks. It doesn't have that supple flexibility. So that's how I think of youth and old age, or, put in proper terms, I suppose it's youth and, adulthood or middle age, is that it's, you could say in certain ways that we're losing those abilities, and it is possible to. It's easier to preserve a structure, or it's easier to preserve something than it is to lose it and then relearn it, to lose it and get it back. But yeah, that's most of what, that's the Platonic idea, is that we don't actually learn anything new. We're just remembering something. I have that theory about music. I haven't really shared this with anyone. It doesn't directly have to do with youth in terms of the human life cycle, but I believe that every melody that touches us at our core on an instinctual level is something that, we're replicating. And I believe that electronic dance music, all of the sounds that it makes that we think of as like new sounds, I think that these, and I've seen videos demonstrating this, you can create all of those sounds with acoustic tools. They might use some artificial material like a plastic or something, but there's you can use wood and you can use leather, and you can figure out a way to make all of these sounds, or you can use animals, right, like frogs and things, or you can use the human voice, beatboxing. So I think that all of the music that we consider to be futuristic and forward-looking and progressive and new, I think that all of those sounds and all of those melodies, all the constituent parts, necessarily are just reminding us of very old and ancient forms of culture that we forgot for a long time because they got papered over with other things. And I think, a lot of the things that you're talking about, these, these cannibal rituals and so on, that are, I think they've come into our culture politically through conspiracy theory, which is to say that people have this sense that, General Buttnaked must be right. The elites really must be sacrificing kids. And I think the reason they feel that way on a deep instinctual level is because that was the basal agricultural religion. That was, every agriculture. I mean, obviously agriculture, we could speculate, evolved or emerged independently in Mesoamerica, but we know they did human sacrifice in Mesoamerica. And we know that they did it in the Middle East. And, I think there's a good case to be made. They did it in India. Part of the religious reconstructionism that I've tried to speculate on is trying to look at these pantheons not as we have tried to explain them as, Carl Jung would say, well, they're different archetypes. They're different aspects of the human soul. I have a different idea, which is that each of these gods represents a total, holistic, religious practices, and that most original religions didn't have, generally speaking, more than two gods. You could conceive, okay, well, there's a god and he has a wife or something, but really, these were very simple. These were very easy to understand. They weren't these complicated big pantheons. And so I would say that for nomadic cultures, I think they worshipped the sun and the storm as the two dominant features of nomadic life. And the sun sort of represents this feminine, giving energy. Everyone's energized by the sun. And then the storm represents the hunt. So the hunting and the storm god is one archetype. And then separate from that, you have the god of the rain, and you have the god of the fire. So the god of the rain, obviously, you need to do your rain dance. You need it for your agriculture. But then you have the god of fire, who's the god of sacrifice in Vedic mythology. It's Agni. In Greek, I believe it's Vulcan. And people have, speculated with regard to the Old Testament, trying to figure out via the Canaanite religion, what does the God of the Old Testament, what is that most closely related to? Is that a storm god? Is that a volcano god? What is that? And, by virtue of monotheism, you're kind of compressing and syncretizing a lot of different polytheistic traditions together. But my argument is that all those polytheistic traditions were actually ultimately monotheistic. So instead of saying that, primitive people were all polytheists and then we became monotheists, it's kind of more of a horseshoe theory of we started off more monotheistic or dualistic and then became polytheistic over time because you had nomads invading agricultural zones and mixing religions together because, that's what happens. And unless you totally wipe out the existing people, you're going to have some kind of syncretism. And then that went back and forth and back and forth. And then finally, monotheism is just returning to a more a primordial or even pre-agricultural form of religion. And other people have the opinion that animism and the idea that everything is alive and everything has a spirit. Well, I don't think that's actually contradictory with monotheism, certainly not from a Platonic perspective. But yeah, those are, you want something zany, you want something out there. Those are when you say like returning to youth, the abilities of youth, I'm not just thinking of the human individual organism. I'm thinking of our civilization as a single body, as the body human. And what were we like in our human youth, in the youth of our civilization? And what was that like? And now that we're old and we're contorted and we have bad posture, we can't learn Chinese, so we can't, sing music properly, and we can't grip the bar. And we're like, hey, why isn't anything working? Why are we falling apart here? Having to relearn that, do some cultural yoga, kind of sounds like what you're doing. You're putting yourself in these weird postures and positions that most people don't want to be in, that they don't find to be natural. But for you, it does seem natural. It does seem like, well, this is the form that my life should take, and it seems there's some intuition that's leading it, and things are making sense, or we're sense making as we go along. So yeah, I'll be excited to hear what happens next and start seeing some of this footage. Are there going to be are we just doing private screenings, or are there going to be any public screenings that you can forecast for the future that people might be able to find in a theater or online?
Yes. So in exactly 1 month from now, there will be a screening that is open to the public in New York. The only problem is, I say it's not the only problem, but I've got a lot of footage from the last year or so, but I have a 1 month sprint to put together a first cut. So it'll not be the final thing, but I think it's very important to, test it in front of a live audience. Like I was showing a short version of the Samuel Alandi documentary at this film festival in Poland, and it's always like when you see something tested, like it's on a big screen and there's this audience, like there's almost like you realize that cinema is not just like this experience where it's like just like you and the film, but it's like the collective feeling in the room. You can kind of feel that, and you can feel how people respond to certain scenes and what works and what doesn't. So I will be testing the first cut in New York, and it will be public, but if people are interested, they can message you. You can let them know the details. So I will not disclose them here, but yes. And then after that, the goal is well, I have this production company that is helping me out, and they are finding a distributor for it. So it might be on some platform. I don't know what platform it will be on, but it's all happening in the background. So stay tuned.
Excellent. Well, we are at the edge of our seats in suspense of the next word. We'll see, I guess, next month how that screening goes, and be off to the races to the next, whatever opportunities arise. So I appreciate you coming on. We've run out of time, but I'll make sure any links you send me, ways that people can support you and your project, and inquire regarding some VIP tickets for this screening and other things of that nature. So we'll include all that anything you send me, we'll get that up there. But that's all the time we have for today, unfortunately. But it's very interesting, very joyous, very very life affirming. So we will hopefully. As long as you're alive, we will be doing a follow-up one of these at some point in the future. So Oswaldo Horowitz, thank you so much for coming on.
Mr. Jokel, it's been a pleasure.
All right, take care now. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye now. Okay, guys, that's all for today. If you like it, obviously, give it a like, give it a comment, restack it. You can financially support me if you like the menagerie. I'm always trying to surprise people. I never want to be known as the guy who does the same podcast over and over again. That's my greatest fear in life. I suppose I'm not as adventurous as Oswaldo, but I try to be cognitively, intellectually adventurous and seek out new perspectives, new ways of viewing the world. So this is definitely out there. This is definitely outside my wheelhouse, but we made it happen. So if you guys like this, you're going to have to support Oswaldo, and I guess I will speak to you guys again soon at some point in the future. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.